All right, let's dive into this deep dive into Mycoplasma. Looks like we've got a pretty impressive stack of research here. Textbooks, journal articles, someone's been busy.
Definitely looks like it. Always a good sign.
You know, for something most folks have probably never even heard of, Mycoplasma can cause some, well, pretty big problems.
Oh, absolutely. They might be tiny, but they definitely pack a punch.
Yeah.
And they really push the boundaries of what we even think of as life. I mean, these are the smallest self-replicating organisms we know of.
It's like almost not even there, but then bam, infection. So where do they come from? Evolutionarily speaking, I mean.
Well, think way back. They're actually ancient descendants of bacteria, kind of similar to Clostridia.
Mm-hmm.
But over a really, really long time, they've basically gotten rid of anything extra.
Streamlined.
Exactly. Like most bacteria have cell walls, right?
Yeah.
Kind of their protection. But Mycoplasma, nope, ditched them.
So why lose the armor? Seems kind of, important for a bacterium.
Well, think about it this way. If you're trying to squeeze into tiny spaces, between cells, inside tissues, having that bulky cell wall, not helpful. They're more like, I guess you could say, ninjas of the bacterial world. Sneaky, and they get everywhere.
So that's why they're in, what, plants, insects, animals, even us?
Exactly. 16 different species have been found just hanging out in humans. Some harmless, some not so much. Really shows you just how diverse this microscopic world is.
Makes you wonder what else is going on in there that we don't even realize. Right?
Yeah.
But okay, so we're looking at Mycoplasma, but there's one in particular you wanted to dive into, Mycoplasma pneumonia. What's the story with that one?
Well, it's the one behind what people call walking pneumonia.
Yeah.
And honestly, that name is a bit misleading because while it's not as severe as typical pneumonia, it can still really knock you down for weeks.
So not exactly a walk in the park then, more like a forced slow march. And it's all because of this tiny Mycoplasma pneumonia. What does it do?
Basically, it goes after your respiratory system, attaches to cells in your lungs, and it just disrupts how they're supposed to work. But sometimes it kind of sets off a chain reaction. Your immune system goes haywire trying to fight it off. And that response, sometimes it causes problems that go beyond the lungs themselves.
Okay, so it's not just the infection itself. It's like our own body fighting back is what causes even more trouble. That's a kind of a double whammy.
Right. And we're talking things like skin rashes, even joint pain, sometimes even neurological problems.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild to think a respiratory infection could cause all that.
Definitely makes you think twice about, just pushing through if you feel sick. Like maybe your body's trying to tell you something.
Exactly. Always a good idea to listen to your body, and if something feels off, especially if it seems kind of weird or unrelated, go see a doctor. Better safe than sorry.
Solid advice. Yeah. Okay, but so Mycoplasma, it's not just in our lungs. Your research also delves into the urogenital tract, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically ureaplasma and Mycoplasma hominis. What got you interested in those two?
Well, the thing is, you can actually have them and be totally fine. They're often found in healthy people without causing any issues. It's just sometimes they become what we call opportunistic pathogens. They kind of wait for the right moment and then boom, infection.
So they're like those, what do they call those fish that clean, like bigger fish, but then sometimes they take a nibble of the fish itself.
That's a great analogy. And the urogenital tract, well, it's got a really delicate balance of microorganisms. It's kind of a prime spot for those opportunistic infections to happen.
I see. So what kind of things throw off that balance? Like what gives those Mycoplasma species the opportunity?
Lots of things, actually. Changes in pH, hormones going up and down. Even other infections can make it easier for them to take over. And when they do, you can end up with, well, things like urethritis, bacterial vaginosis, even pelvic inflammatory disease in some cases.
So definitely not something to ignore, even if they seem, relatively harmless at first.
Exactly. Regular checkups, talking to your doctor, especially about anything going on down there, is always the best policy.
Okay, so we've got these tiny bacteria. They're everywhere. They can cause all sorts of problems. But how do we even know if we have a Mycoplasma infection? I mean, they're microscopic. And what can we do about it?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Diagnosing these infections. It's a challenge in itself. And then there's the whole question of treatment, which has its own set of complexities.
This is definitely more than just a quick peek under the microscope, isn't it? We've got a whole saga unfolding here. Sounds like it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of diagnosis and treatment.
Absolutely. Get ready for some serious detective work and some surprising breakthroughs.
Yeah, it always gets me how something so small can be such a pain to actually find. Diagnosing Mycoplasma infections, it can be a real headache.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, they're practically invisible, right? Like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle's alive and moving around.
Pretty much. And the traditional way of figuring out what bacteria is causing an infection, growing it in the lab, that doesn't always work so well with Mycoplasma. They can be super picky.
Picky how? Well, they need very specific conditions to grow. Like, the temperature has to be just right, the food, the environment.
Yeah.
It's tough to replicate that perfectly in a lab. So sometimes, even if it's there, it won't grow, and you miss it.
So it's like trying to grow a rare orchid or something.
Yeah.
It needs the perfect conditions to, actually thrive. But hold on, I was looking at your research and it mentioned something called PCR testing. Is that a way to get around that, like a better way to find them?
It is. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction.
Yeah.
And it's really changed how we diagnose these infections. Imagine trying to find one specific grain of sand on a beach.
Oh, that's impossible.
Right. But what if you had a metal detector that was only looking for that one grain based on, say, like a tiny bit of metal inside it?
Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
That's kind of what PCR does with Mycoplasma. It lets us find a specific DNA sequence, even if it's hiding among millions of others.
So instead of trying to grow the whole bacteria, we're basically looking for its like DNA fingerprint, super high tech.
Exactly. And that's especially helpful for those really, really hard to grow species, the ones we call fastidious, like Mycoplasma genitalium, for example. Super tough to grow in a lab, but with PCR, we can spot it no problem.
So we're basically using cutting-edge tech to go on a microscopic manhunt. I like it. But, it's one thing to find them, but then what? How do you actually treat Mycoplasma infection? Especially if they're so good at hiding and being picky.
Well, the good news is we're not totally defenseless. Antibiotics, they're still our main weapon. They work by messing with the bacteria's ability to grow and multiply, essentially stopping them in their tracks.
So we've got ways to fight back, but I'm guessing it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Like, you wouldn't use the same antibiotic for every Mycoplasma infection.
You got it. The specific antibiotic you need, it depends on a few things. What species of Mycoplasma is causing the problem, where the infection is, even if there's any chance of antibiotic resistance. It's all about using the right tool for the job.
So it's like, I don't know, you wouldn't use a hammer to fix a leaky faucet. You need the right tool for the right problem.
Perfect analogy. And that's why seeing a doctor is so important. Self-treating, especially with these infections, it can backfire big time.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. They're tiny, they're sneaky, they're hard to find, and they can cause all sorts of problems. But we're not powerless against them. We have the tools to diagnose and treat them, even if it takes a bit of detective work. But I have a feeling there's still more to this story, right? Like, what's the future hold for Mycoplasma research? What else are we learning about them?
Oh, there's so much more to uncover. And trust me, some of it's pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about the potential to change how we approach medicine, even create new technologies inspired by these tiny bacteria.
Mind-blowing, huh? I mean, they're already pretty mind-blowing just existing, right? So small, but they found a way to make it work. So how are we, using that to our advantage?
Well, think about it. They've gotten rid of everything they don't absolutely need. Millions of years of evolution have basically made them the ultimate minimalists.
So, they're the Marie Kondo of bacteria.
Yeah.
Only keeping what sparks joy or, in their case, survival.
Yeah, something like that. But because of that, they're super efficient. They can adapt to all sorts of conditions. And that's something scientists are really interested in.
Because if we can, figure out their secrets, then we can maybe use that to design better stuff, right?
Well, exactly. Imagine new antibiotics that actually work better and have fewer side effects. Or biofuels that are way more sustainable. We could even learn from them to make new therapies for all kinds of diseases.
All because of these little tiny bacteria. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
It is. And there's another thing, synthetic biology. You've heard of that. Basically, scientists are trying to build artificial cells from scratch.
Like cells that don't even exist naturally. Whoa.
Yep. And Mycoplasma, with their super simple genomes, they're like a perfect blueprint for that.
So they're not just helping us make things better, they're inspiring us to create whole new forms of life. That's a lot to take in.
It is. And of course, there's still so much we don't know. We're just scratching the surface, really.
But even just scratching the surface has shown us how much potential there is, right?
Oh, absolutely. Mycoplasma research is a field that's just exploding with possibilities. It's really exciting to be a part of it.
Well, I gotta say, this deep dive has definitely opened my eyes to a whole new world. I mean, we started with what even is Mycoplasma, And now we're talking about revolutionizing medicine and creating new life forms.
It just goes to show you never know where a deep dive will take you, right?
Exactly. And sometimes the smallest things can lead to the biggest discoveries. So thanks for taking us on this journey into the amazing world of mycoplasma.
My pleasure. It's been a fascinating journey for me, too.
And for everyone listening, remember, next time you hear mycoplasma, don't just think tiny bacteria, think endless possibilities. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep learning.